Brandon Day graduated from Ferris State's professional tennis management program in 2022. 4 years later, he's the assistant director at a 31 court club, and he's not even 30. He's at North Hills Club in Raleigh, North Carolina, one of the only tri-racquet clubs on the East Coast with programming across tennis, pickleball, and padel. Jarrett Chirico connected us. And after sitting down with Jarrett, I wanted to talk to the person he's been investing in to hear what this industry looks like from someone still early in it. I'm Evan Dechtman. This is CourtSide. Brandon, welcome.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks so much for having me.
I want to know a little bit about your origin story. What's your first real memory with a tennis racket?
I always laugh at this because I think my sister and I were just little kids, and we had the option to either go play tennis at our summer tennis program, or we could go down the street and be babysat by the angry old lady. So tennis was kind of the lesser of two evils there. And even though I wasn't that into it as a kid, it was more baseball. It was, something I did every day because I did not want to go to the babysitter's house.
That's an excellent choice. I approve. Most people don't know Ferris State has a professional tennis management program. How did you find it, and what made you pick that over a standard business degree?
So funny enough, back to my sister again, she was playing college tennis, and she's a teacher. The teacher education program at her school got cut, so she transferred to Ferris. And then just became friends with a lot of the PTM students. And I was like, okay, that seems kind of interesting. Went to a couple of their camps and then ultimately ended up going there. I think what I really like is people. So Rackets is an avenue for me to connect with people. There's no other profession where, I'm on the court with CEOs, doctors, lawyers, anything, you name it, connecting with those different people. So for me, it was always having a business degree is safe, but having the ability to learn and still get to play tennis sounded really cool. So I jumped right in.
I love that. And you minored in digital marketing, which is near and dear to my heart. So, we got lots to talk about. One of the things that I noticed that you won the Justin Hermes Most Dedicated Award and the Wilson Business Professional Award. What were you doing that your peers kept noticing?
I think the first part is I ran our student organization. So I was the president of our student organization. So through that, I was I was like, okay, what does a president do? And the people before me, it was like, oh, it's just you run the meeting. We have a weekly meeting, and you make the slideshow and you just talk about the slides. And I was like, that's incredibly boring. What you'll come to find is for good and for bad. I challenge everything. So I was like, okay, let's see what we can do. So I organized the first ever pickleball and platform tennis certifications for the students because after my first summer as an intern, I was like, okay, it's no longer tennis. It's rackets. So if you know one thing, you might be able to get a job. The bare minimum entry to get in the door is you have to be able to teach multiple racket sports. So that specific year, I was like, okay, we need the experience. With universities and things like that, it takes time to change. Okay, this is what it's about, and it has to go through all of the steps to change within the university. But as an RSO, registered student organization, I had a little bit more flexibility, and thankfully, I still to this day, Dan Santorum, who was the CEO of PTR, picked up the phone. I got his number and I just called him, and he picked up on the first ring and was like, "Hey, what can I do for you? How can I help?" I'm always looking to grow the game. And so he helped us organize workshops in Michigan. And yeah, I think there was 32 of us that were on the original 100 list who are certified in tennis, pickleball, and platform tennis.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that. Well, right here, this is kind of the core story. And to my listeners out here, a lot of you are at that stage where you're wondering how people can actually move up in this industry. And so my question to you is, you graduated in 2022. 4 years later, you're the assistant director at a 31 court club. Walk me through how that happened, because that timeline is not normal.
Yeah, I think it definitely leads back to of, yes, I graduated in 22, but we have 3 mandatory internships in our program. So, my first summer, I went to a homeowners association in Vermont, and it was a great experience. I mean, it was incredible, but wasn't exactly what I was looking for. Yeah, I didn't teach a ton. I wasn't gaining that experience that I thought I was going to. So I looked up the 50 platinum clubs of America, and I went down from number one. And I believe at the time Baltimore was 30, 34 ish, and nobody wanted to talk to me until I got to Jarrett. And I cold called Jarrett, and Jarrett's like, I've never had anybody cold call me for an internship. So you could be awful. I don't know anything about you, but what's your email? Here's an offer letter. So that was kind of where it started. So that was 2019. And then through working with Jared, it was just like he's like, okay, like, do you want to teach in the summers or do you want to have a career? And I was like, I want it to be a career. I'm going to school for it. So from there on, it was like a constant push every day. Even when I went back to school, it was, are you posting on LinkedIn? Have you reached out to at least 3 directors? And it was just constant. Even when I wasn't there with him, even when I did an internship where he wasn't my director, it was still those constant reminders of like, hey, are you growing your network? Have you talked to this person? Have you talked to this person? And then through that, I had a seasonal job who I met through my network, and I went up and taught in Greenwich for the summer. And then Jarrett, one of his pros, got a director's job in Florida, and he's like, hey, I've got an opening. You're going to start at the bottom. We do about 2.5 million in revenue a year. There's 12 pros. You could make $0, you could make as much money as you can make on the court. He's like, "I have no idea. It'll be completely up to you." So it was really going down to Dallas at Royal Oaks and starting at the bottom. I think my first 3, 4 months, 85% of the stuff I did was teach with other pros. So I would just jump on the court with them. I was making $0. Just like learning and like just seeing how they interact and trying to understand what people want. I think the biggest issue is when people either, they graduate and they start teaching full time, whether they went to a PTM school or they just played on a tennis team, is they want their students to want what they want. Hey, you're taking a lesson with me. You want to play college tennis. You want to be a professional tennis player. And it was really there at Royal Oaks where I started to understand that it has nothing to do with what I want. You know, they want a service and they're going to tell you exactly what they want. I look back and I had a lady who was my favorite lesson, and we would play short court for an hour, and she just wanted to talk. She just wanted someone to talk to, and she wanted to talk about tennis and professional tennis, and what's going on with pickleball and the club and the area in my life, and what my wife and I are up to. And it was just understanding of she just wanted someone to talk to that was reliable, that was there every single week, and she didn't have to pick up the balls and that kind of stuff. So it was Royal Oaks really transformed me to understand, okay, what do people want and what kind of service do they want? And then from there, through the Directors Club of America, I was able to connect with John Wilkening, who's the general manager at North Hills Club, and he had a position open up, and yeah, I made the jump from Dallas to North Carolina about 6 months ago.
That is such a great story. And it shows a little bit of, or a lot of bit of tenacity, along with a sprinkle of luck. And here you are now working at being the director of programming at the North Hills Club. That's just incredible. Did you get to the North Hills Club prior to Jarrett being there?
No, so Jarrett started I want to say 6 days before I did. So they did a bracket search with McMahon Careers, and Jarrett ultimately was, selected and took that role. And even before Jarrett was selected, they had their assistant director position open up, and John called me, and it was just someone who I reached out to on LinkedIn probably 6 months prior, and just said, "Hey, I would be interested in living in the Carolinas, whether it's north or south. I don't know anybody there. Would you be willing to hop on a 10-minute call? I'm just looking to connect with somebody in the area, and then 6 months later for it to be my boss is pretty fantastic.
And that's the power of just doing reach outs. And, as my dad used to say, you need to throw enough stuff against the wall and something's going to stick. So you went from racket sports professional, if I can make that bold assertion, to director of programming in under 3 years at Royal Oaks. What were you doing differently than the pros who stay at the same level for a decade?
I think, the biggest portion of it is you have to look for opportunity. You know, I think my big in was that I sat down with the director of women's tennis at the time before he ultimately moved on to his assistant director role, and I said, "I want to know your job. I want to be able to do your job. And I want you to have the title. Doesn't matter to me. I just want to help you out. How can I help you out?" And then he's like, I really don't like running this women's league. So if you want to run the women's league and you can do it, awesome. So, I took a little piece there. So I started running a beginner women's league. And then I was like, okay, you do all the pro rotations and court scheduling. Like, I want to know how. Like, just a second set of eyes. Like, if anything happens, I can help out. If you're sick or anything, you have someone to kind of lean on. So I really learned his role in every single thing that he did. And when he moved on, it was a simple conversation. I sat down in Jarrett's office and I just said, "Hey, I can do his role today. I could have done his role 6 months ago. Here's all the information. We can keep this thing rolling." And so it was a no-brainer because there was no guessing, there was no gaps. Any question he had, it was like, "Okay, here's all of the information. Here's everything you need to know. Here's how we've been doing it. Here's how I would like to change it a little bit." So it was like a full year of training unofficially just for a chance to get the job. And it's
And
understanding when you're 23 years old and you're like, okay, you have to run one of the biggest women's tennis programs in the country. You have to be, really set on everything and make sure that you're very sharp because age is a huge factor. And so that was kind of I just said, okay, I can do everything. You can fact check, you can test me. Let's get this thing rolling. Or someone else can be taught in a couple weeks before he leaves. So you have 2 weeks to train someone, or I've been training for the past year and we can give this thing a go.
I love that. And, that really segues into kind of my next line of questioning, and that's about programming, right? So, director of programming, and I ask this on every episode. What does a Tuesday look like for you in the life of Brandon?
So, and it's always evolving. I think it's very season dependent. Are we in our women's season? Are we in our summer season? Different things like that. So to give you an example of like tomorrow, yeah, I'll do a 6 a.m. court. We call it court to coffee. So it's a cardio class for our working members to give
Oh
them
my
a couple
gosh, I wanna
options.
go. I love that.
Yeah. So it's fun, get a little bit of music going. They're already using the gym, so might as well have them on our courts. And then from 7 to 10, I'll teach some lessons, some group lessons. And then 10 to 12 will be I'll jump in for the junior camp. Usually from 12 to 12:30, I'll meet with Jarrett. We meet pretty much every day, just kind of touch base, see where we're at, what can we add, what are we going to cut, you know, what pros do we want to move around to give a better experience. And then afternoon camp from 1 to 3:30, and then I'll teach 3:30 to 8, just depending. Some days it's group lessons, sometimes it's junior team tennis. Just really depends on which part of the season we're in. But it's a lot on the court, and then when I get home, it depends how much leeway my wife gives me. To be honest with you, it's we'll be looking at what other programs, other clubs are running. I usually spend an hour at nighttime when we're watching TV or doing whatnot, and just trying to figure out, okay, what are other people doing that we're not doing, and what can we do to be the only? What programs am I not seeing anywhere? So North Hills is the only club that offers this program. Um, so yeah, then after that, it's just a rest and repeat.
Sure, sure. So, well, North Hills runs, as we've established here, tennis, pickleball, and padel across 31 courts. How do you program across 3 sports without them eating into one another?
I mean, I honestly don't think they eat into each other at all. I think we're lucky enough to have three sports because they feed off each other. To give you an example, we play tennis with all of the parents. The kids have been doing a lot of pickleball in summer camp. So on Thursday, we'll have 36 parent-child teams coming out for a little paddles and pizza, and it just helps us to get those parents to play pickleball because their kids are already playing it. I think the big thing is we look at like competing times. So we're not going to offer, you know, a drill in every single sport at the same exact time if we're trying to pull from that pool. So, ladies tennis is very popular in the morning, so evenings is a better time for something in pickleball. You know, men play a lot of tennis in the evening, so early morning stuff for pickleball and padel are going to be, or vice versa, where they're playing tennis in the morning, which allows them to play pickleball and padel at night. I just think you have to look at the usage and what your membership is doing and when they're doing it, and then program around that. Because at the end of the day, we can, hey, this is the best programming you can have, and we have the best pros and everything's perfect. But if it's not at the times that your members want to use the courts, it really doesn't matter regardless. So I think our membership is kind of carved out. Okay, this is when we're using the courts. You either have to program during that time or we're not going to be there.
So to my listeners out there, if you've been in club work for any amount of time, you know that who you work for matters just as much as where you work, right? You've credited Jarrett publicly for where you are without turning this into the Jarrett episode, which we've already done. What specifically did he do that other directors don't? And I know you touched on it a little bit about he gave you a chance because you cold called, dig in a little bit to that story. That just is so great and so indicative of Jarrett's spirit.
Yeah, I think it started off, after the cold call, and he would follow up every week. And he did go in a little bit more in depth and, and send him a resume and videos of me hitting and feeding. But I think it was from the first day I sat down with him, and it was like, okay, what do you want to do? I don't want people on my staff that don't want to be directors. So he's very cut and dry, and his expectations are his expectations. They never change. So he's going to tell you from day one, and that's what he expects every time you're on the court, every time you're on his staff. It doesn't change. It might evolve, but his standards are his standards, and you either get with them or you teach somewhere else. But I think what really sets him apart for good and for bad is like he is always overanalyzing everything. I mean, down to the smallest detail, he's thought about it, how he would think about it as a director, as a parent, as a person that would be doing the clinic. Like it doesn't matter. He looks at every single issue from 30 angles, and then he tries to collect from there. I think a big change we made a lot of changes in our junior program when we first got here at North Hills. And it was all under the scope of when we first got there, we're, evaluating the clinics, we're seeing what's going on. And Jarrett goes, if I was a parent that was a member here, my kid was in that clinic, I wouldn't pay for it. He's like, I wouldn't send my kid to this program. So how can we expect or, demand the membership come to these clinics if I wouldn't do it for my own kids? So I think a lot of the stuff is that perspective, but also, through the directors club is you have so many touch points. There's 1,500 members, and he talks to every single one of them. So if someone in California is running something super cool or they have an issue or something going on and they connect with Jarrett about it, he just has so much information because he might not have gone through an issue at his own club, but he's talked to someone and been a soundboard for them. So he's like, hey, there was this issue, at this club in Florida, and this is what they did, and this is what the resolution was. I want to tweak it a little bit so we can use it at our club when the similar issue comes up. So I think that's what makes him like really special is like he's always on, he always answers his phone, and he's very much so any information is good information. He'll talk to anybody if he believes that he can either help them or in the future help his own program.
Wrote something on LinkedIn about burnout being a side effect of poor leadership. What were you seeing in the industry that made you put that out there?
Well, I went to school school to be a teaching pro. So that means I have in my class we were 17. There's between 15 and 20 kids in each class. So, I was at Ferris for 4 years. So I know hundreds of kids that are my age or, and then that are teaching full time. And it's so interesting to see the career paths and what's happening with their careers and how many people are leaving the industry and how many people just hate what they're doing. and just having a conversation and just talking to them and understanding what's going on. To give you an example, Jarrett and I are here, he's like, "Hey, if you're 30 and you're not interviewing for director jobs and you're not seeking that next role," he's like, "I'll fire you." He's like, "You have to continually look for more," and he's like, "Anything I can do, like, if you don't wanna meet with me and you don't wanna learn about, like, the few things that I'm doing that you're not doing yet, that we have an issue." So I could be the highest billing pro with the busiest lesson book and the members love me and all that stuff. But Jared's looking at it from the standpoint of if you're no longer hungry and you're just content with where you're at, I have no use for you. So I think that's a huge aspect of it. And he wants me to fly. He wants me to be a director. He wants me to be a better director than he is. And I think a lot of places directors see it as dollar signs. If I'm your highest billing pro and I leave, you're never going to retain 100% of those lessons, and it will take a while to recover them, even if you hire in, another superstar. So people get stuck in the trap of, hey, you're so great, but I'm never going to let you leave because if you leave, I have to replace you. Uh, and I think a lot of people get stuck in that rut, and it's like, hey, I can't get off the court and learn the things that I need to learn to move up because my boss just wants me to teach. I said, I'm the best pro ever. I should never leave.
I love that. There's the old adage in tennis, well, really any racket sports, but that is move your feet, right? You have to constantly be moving. Footwork is the foundation for everything. So we can maybe translate that to always be moving, always be thinking about the next steps, how to improve, never be satisfied, right? I love that. I'm going to move to more about the business. And that's what really this podcast is about the business of racket sports, which we've gotten into a little bit. But this is the part for my audience that I know a lot of them want to hear, especially if they're in early in their career or at least thinking about getting into it. You've stacked a ton of certifications: RSPA, PPR, PPTR, PTR, DUPR, RPO, DCA, CRSE. I mean, I'm going bananas here by all the acronyms, but which ones actually move the needle for your career and which are just letters after your name?
So I think it depends on the person. To be completely honest with you, I think certification is a shield. It shows you that I took the necessary steps to educate myself on how to teach better. I don't think they do anything after that unless you're willing. So all of those different organizations have great things that they offer, but only as far as you'll reach. So I think the DCA is great because there's so much information from so many different sources that'll always pick up the phone if you reach out to them. So being in the DCA is so valuable, but if you never reach out to anyone, it's just a couple letters behind your name. RSPA, incredible. I absolutely love it. I'm on the North Carolina RSPA board, but if you're not connecting with your other pros, reaching out, using their continuing educations to get better, again, it's just letters. I think at the end of the day, it's you're either a part of that organization and it's worth it because you're making new peers, you're making new connections, you're becoming a better teaching pro, you're becoming a better business person. But if you're not willing to go past just getting the certification, it's useless.
What once again, move your feet, right? Let you gotta
Absolutely.
you can you can look at the ball go by you, but you gotta move to the ball. I love that. So what does a young racket sports professional actually make? Walk me through the real math. Year one versus where you are now.
I think there's such a wide divide. I think a lot of it depends on your agreement. I think that's first and foremost the lack of education of compensation from an entry level pro to even a director, but also just your location. And you have to look at, okay, am I getting a flat on court rate with a higher salary? Or do I have a lower salary where I'm getting percentages of what I'm teaching and what I'm bringing in? So I think there's such a wide spectrum of agreements out there, and just understanding where you're at. In Texas, I can teach 12 months out of the year outside. Yeah, there might be one or 2 weeks where it's cold or it's a little too hot, but I could still teach if people wanted it, compared to, Chicago or the Northeast where, you are gonna see a higher base comp because there's snow on the ground. Not everyone has indoor facilities, so I think it's really regionally based is gonna be the best answer, but it also depends on your club. How busy, how many available members are there? How big is your program, and ultimately what type of contract does your director have? Because if I started out and Jarrett's teaching 60 hours a week, whether Jarrett's phenomenal or not, I'm gonna hit with the director. Why would I hit with some kid that just graduated college if I can hit with the director? So if the director's agreement's correct and they're being compensated correctly and Jarrett doesn't have to teach 60 hours a week and he say, "Hey, I got this young guy and he's fantastic. You should give him a try." I'm gonna make more money because I'm gonna be on the court more and I'm not directly competing with my director of rackets. Um, so I think it's a very loaded question, but it can go anywhere. There's first year pros that make $30,000. There's first year pros that are making $150,000. I think it's so circumstantial. And you have to be willing to find those locations and those hotbeds of tennis. A pro in Atlanta, a pro in Dallas, a pro in Florida is probably going to make more money than a pro in Chicago because there's more people playing tennis, there's more courts, there's better weather. So it just kind of,
Thank you for that. I know that the audience and the listeners out there, especially the ones that are coming into this or thinking about creating a career in racket sports, they'll appreciate that. Thank you for that in-depth answer. So you're in your mid-20s, assistant director at one of the best racket clubs in the Southeast. Do you want your own directorship? What do the next 5 years look like for you, Brendan?
uh, I think, I keep grinding in here at North Hills. My goal is to be a director by 28. I think I have a really good position in a really good club and a really good leadership team. Even beyond Jarrett, John Wilkening
Keep moving
is
your feet.
abs
Keep moving your feet.
yeah, is absolutely fantastic. So just gaining information from them and just learning and gaining that experience, but having the ability to look at jobs different than someone that really needs a job. I don't need a job. I have a great job. I have room to grow in my job. So it really depends on what's available and who's willing to take a risk because even at 30, I'm considered young. The average age of a director is over 55. So I would be, significantly younger. At 26, I'm pretty much half that age. So waiting for the right opportunity. But always be looking and understanding clubs and just understanding where the industry is going to be able to make an educated guess on which club I would have a great opportunity at because I don't think clubs are built equally. There's even in the country clubs, there's a vast majority of memberships. You have memberships who are very, very wealthy and how you would operate that compared to a mid-tier club where the members are wealthy, but they're not that top tier. They're still, chasing something, you know, bigger than they are. I think those 2 clubs operate so different, and it's looking and understanding which club better suits me to have a career there. I think my goal is to find a director job where I can build a legacy. I'm open to moving around and looking for different opportunities, but ultimately I would like to find a place where, I could raise kids and have a home and have a home base, and as long as the club is providing for me and allowing me to do what I feel is right, then I would jump.
Well, that serves up my next question beautifully. What's the biggest thing the private club racket sports industry gets wrong about developing young talent?
Uh, I think it's very demanding. It's hard to get started. I think they get it wrong in that in the wo wrong is interesting. I don't think that the private club does anything wrong. I think the barrier to entry is higher, which isn't necessarily wrong, but the membership is at any private club is much more demanding. So I think that's the biggest thing. Once pros get in, I don't think they ever leave the private club world. Just the way the members treat you, they take care of you, the club takes care of you. I just think it's a much different quality of life teaching in the private sector versus teaching in the commercial. So I just think it's tough to get in. The barrier to entry is the only thing that's hard. And I think more people would stay in the career if they got into the private sector.
So this is the last one. This is the one that I ask everyone. If someone calls you tomorrow, recent PTM grad, first day at their first club job, what's the one piece of advice you'd give them?
I think it's very cliche, but always be available. It doesn't matter if it's for a lesson with a 3-year-old or if it's hitting with an 87-year-old at the service line for 90 minutes, sitting at the pro shop, just introducing yourself, always be available. You have to be there like it's your second home. It has to become your first home. You always have to be at the club. Opportunities, out of sight, out of mind. Opportunities don't come to people who are not at the facility. Even looking at North Hills is when there was snowing on the ground, I sat at the desk. I didn't have to, but Jared's like, "Go home." I'm like, "I'm good. We can figure out some stuff." And I would say I got half of my lesson book from just sitting at the desk. And it was just people would walk in. I'm looking for a lesson at this time when the courts open up. I'm available. I got you. Here's my number. So when my kids are interested in playing tennis, they've never played before. I love working with beginners and I love working with kids. Let's do this thing. And so I think it's people jump the gun and they have an expectation to be busy right off the bat, and that's not true for anybody. Things have to be built. So always be available. Take everything that comes your way.
I love that. I love that answer. Brandon, thank you so much for being on courtside. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.